guys, it's Mark Zickery, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zickery of Space Command. And we have a Kickstarter campaign going, and you probably know that by now, so go there. There's great stuff from Star Trek and Twilight Zone and Space Command and tons of stuff. And if you haven't been to our Kickstarter page, it's down there, and it'll make wonderful things happen. But I wanted to do a video to recommend some horror and fantasy things I've been enjoying lately that I think you guys would enjoy too, and that are a little bit off the beaten path. First of all, there's a really interesting fantasy series that debuted on Netflix, Shadow and Bone, which is based on a series of fantasy novels, and it basically takes the world of Tsarist Russia and extrapolates this whole fantasy world where some people have certain powers and so forth. It's so they uploaded the entire first season, and I found it to be very charming. The visual effects were great. The cast is really really good. The stunts are great. I mean, it's a really well done show, and so you can definitely check it out. You'll find it entertaining. The actors are very likable. It was shot in Canada and Hungary for all those like Tsarist era buildings. And it's, I just really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun, and there's an actor. One of the actors is from Westworld, and there he played kind of a total rotten person. Here he's a mixed bag, but it's a fun show, a very fun show. Meantime, I also just watched Exorcist III. Now, this has a very interesting story behind it. The fellow who wrote The Exorcist, the Exorcist was a huge hit movie, and William Peter Blatty wrote the novel. Then he adapted his own script, his own screenplay, won the Oscar for it, and it was just it stands as one of the greatest horror films of all time. Of course, it's a great movie, and if you've never seen it, it's fabulous. And the makeup effects by Dick Smith are stupendous. One thing to be aware of when you see that movie is a lot of people think Max von Sydow was an older actor when he played that role. He wasn't. He was actually, I think, in his 40s, and Dick Smith's age makeup is so superlative that it's just you would never think that it was makeup. So take a look at that when you have a chance. But then they did Exorcist II, and neither William Peter Blatty nor the director William Friedkin were part of it. Disastrous, terrible movie. Don't watch it. But then this came down the pike, Exorcist III. Now originally William Peter Blatty was approached to direct it, but he turned out not to do that. So William Peter Blatty did the movie, wrote and directed the movie. Now the interesting thing is it's a sequel to The Exorcist, but a completely different genre in a way, and I'll go into this. A big problem with doing sequels is if you're not careful, you end up doing the exact same movie again as the first one, and that's diminishing returns because it's just the same done less well. And so the trick with any sequel is to find a way to make it fresh, to make it new, to make it different. And for instance, Alien, it's one of the other great horror movies of all time. Alien, they tried for years to make a sequel, and they could never come up with it. And then James Cameron came aboard and did Aliens. And what he did, which was brilliant, is he changed the genre. Because Alien was a horror movie, whereas Aliens is a science fiction thriller. It's an action movie. So that was very, very clever. And now, so with Exorcist, William Peter Blatty didn't write Exorcist II or Exorcist III. What he did was he wrote a novel called Legion. And in The Exorcist, he'd set up two characters who survive, one of them being a police detective, played in the Exorcist by Lee J. Cobb, and the other was a priest, who was played by Ed Flanders in this film, Exorcist III. Now, the actor who had played Father, the young priest who loses his faith, and I won't go into what happens to him at the end of the first movie, but William Peter Blatty decided that for a sequel to The Exorcist, he would write essentially a serial killer / supernatural thriller. And so he wrote a novel called Legion, and basically it's that cop and the priest he befriends, they're both movie nuts, discover someone in an asylum who looks exactly like the priest, the young priest, but is also claiming to be essentially the reincarnation of a serial killer. And people are being killed with the same MO while this guy's padlocked in a, in a straitjacket in a cell. So the question becomes, how are these murders being done? Is this guy? What's the story with this guy? Who is he? Etc. Etc. So so William Peter Blatty wrote a script of that novel. It didn't have an exorcism, didn't have a priest performing an exorcism, none of that. And they shot the movie. And but then the studio said, well, wait a minute, this has to be released as an Exorcist sequel, and you have to have an exorcism. So they went back and they reshot certain scenes, and they brought in Nicole Williamson, who's normally a very, very good actor. He played Merlin in Excalibur, and he did a great Hamlet. They brought him in as a priest, and who performs an exorcism at the end, and there's all these visual effects. And George C. Scott, in the interim, by the way, Lee J. Cobb had passed away, so they cast George C. Scott, another very, very strong actor, as the cop. And George C. Scott didn't like this revised version because with all the visual effects at the end, all the special effects, he said the only thing that would work is for Madonna to show up because it's so over the top. Well, that didn't happen, of course, but that was the version of the movie that came out, and it didn't really do very well. But when I saw it in the theaters, I thought, well, this is pretty interesting. It's just, it doesn't quite work all the way through, but it's got some very good performances and very, very good writing. So then I found out just recently that William Peter Blatty's original version had been reconstructed. Now, this is fascinating because William Peter Blatty, who had been the writer-director, there was no cut of his version that existed, but there were still videotapes of the dailies. And although it wasn't a perfect solution, they could take those, follow his shooting script, and reconstruct the movie as best they could, which is what they did. Now, so this is the Scream Factory, the Shout Factory. This is their horror line, Scream Factory. This is their Blu-ray edition. And if you want to see this movie in its best version, get this, because it has 2 discs. It has the Exorcist III on the first disc, and it has Exorcist III, better known as Legion in the original version, on the second. And the second is by far the superior of the two. It's, first of all, the restoration of the Exorcist III is very good. It's a gorgeous print. But the second version, the serial killer, priest, whatever he is in that cell, originally they wanted to use the same actor who'd been in The Exorcist, but he was a drinker, and by then he'd gotten to a point where he couldn't remember lines. So they cast Brad Dourif, who played Wormtongue later in Lord of the Rings, as he'd also been in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as the character Billy. They cast him in the role of the killer, and that's a rather stylized version of what he plays, but he is absolutely spectacular. It is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant performance. Then when they did retakes to put in an exorcism, they brought in the actor who they had originally intended to cast from The Exorcist and kind of put him into a few moments and a few lines. It just makes the movie more confusing, but either version is interesting, and the original version, even though it's videotape, is really worth your time and attention. So I recommend this. Now, finally, I'm also going to recommend a certain writer. Now, we've been talking in Mr. Sci-Fi for a long time about the major writers of science fiction and fantasy and horror. And everyone knows, of course, Stephen King. Everyone knows, Heinlein and Ray Bradbury and Asimov and all the big names. But one of the top writers of horror and science fiction thriller is generally not really acknowledged as that. And this is Ira Levin. Now, this is the first edition of the book he wrote, Rosemary's Baby, which I recently watched, the Roman Polanski film starring Mia Farrow. It is terrific. John Cassavetes is in it, and Ruth Gordon. It is a phenomenal film. And so he wrote this great horror story. And then he also wrote The Stepford Wives. And this is about, and it's signed, so that's his signature. And this is the great novel about anti-feminist backlash. And it's about men who are trying to create the perfect woman, quote unquote, and what that does to the women, essentially. And it was a very strong influence on the movie Get Out. But the original, don't watch the one with with Nicole Kidman. It's not as good. Watch the original film of it with Catherine Ross, and Paula Prentice. It's a really good film, and the book is. These stories really hold up. These stories really hold up, and he also wrote a book called Boys from Brazil, which is about cloning and Nazis after the war, and it's great fun too, and and Levin wrote a sequel to Rosemary's Baby called Son of Rosemary that's not entirely successful, but it's a very interesting book about the rise of a messianic figure. So worth your time, and it's all of these are available on audio. So that's a few things you can check out, a few things to while away your time as you wait for the vaccine to kick in. And if you haven't gotten your shots, get them, get them. Don't be afraid of side effects or turning into a zombie or whatever. Just to be able to have life return to, not if not normalcy, at least greater freedom is terrific. So do your part, help end the pandemic as best we can. And then finally, the thing I'll mention is many of you know that this necklace I wear is made up of meteorites from Mars. These are pieces of the planet Mars. But I just got this pin, and at first glance it may look like the space shuttle. Here, I'll get it as close as I can. It may look like the space shuttle, but in reality it's Buran, which is the Soviet space shuttle, where they basically ripped off the design of the shuttle, made some changes that some people feel actually improved it from the shuttle, and it only went up, I think, once, and on remote control or automatic pilot, and then the Soviet Union collapsed, and that was the end of that. But in For All Mankind, they had an episode that had the Buran up in space with people piloting it in a big confrontation, and I thought in lieu of that, it was worthwhile to proudly display it. So there you are. Thanks for everything. Definitely go to our Kickstarter campaign. Throw us a few bucks, or hundreds of bucks, or thousands of bucks, because the faster we get the money, the faster we can get more episodes of Space Command to you. That's it for now. Thanks very much, and we'll talk again real soon. Bye, guys.